Hi, it's Susan from Worldpeacefull, and I just happened to find a video, 11/9, which is Michael Moore's latest film on Trump. And I can't say it was surprising to me, it was probably more confirming to me of the present state of play. I thought I would recount some of my impressions from the film. So I'll just sit with it for a few moments and report back what I felt. The movie opens with many images of Trump rising in the presidential campaign, flashing back to quips that he'd made prior to announcing his run for president. As in all documentaries, you get choice cuts that come in quite quickly, images of Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, the masses of people cheering for their candidates, the use of buzzwords that have been used in previous campaigns. And then surprises come up, which you just go, what the? For me, I was really shocked to hear that Bernie Sanders won 55 of the, what do they call them, congressional districts. He won all of them. There was a sign apparently that I saw in the footage that was flashed saying he'd won all these congressional districts. Yet they were announcing that Hillary Clinton had won. So obviously the film is inferring that it was rigged for her to run. Then I looked at all the emotions on people's faces as they hold so much hope in these candidates. The commentary that, if you like, mirrors the line that there's no way that Trump could win or even run or win. Then you sort of look at the size of that candidate, big man. Then you see flashing before your eyes the various men who have interviewed the women candidates, or had discussions with women televised. And then Michael Moore puts in information on how many women they'd had either some sort of sexual misconduct with, their behaviour, the men that were interviewing them. So he's inferring misogyny. I just sort of want to sit with it for a moment. Some thoughts I had was I didn't know about the massive protests of students in respect to children being killed. And of course that brings in the issue of violence normalised on television and violent video games. And this sort of really powerful belief in violence as a projection of power, as a statement of power. Of course, the National Rifle Association was mentioned. Certainly in Michael's previous films, that was very much connected. This was with Bowling with Columbine. He connected that to the Ku Klux Klan, so white supremacists. One of the children talked about Trump receiving $30 million from National Rifle Association, and of course I immediately thought of Pauline Hanson here in Australia and that recorded meeting they had in the US seeking funding to buy seats, recorded by Al Jazeera. So I guess what's being made visible here is the prejudices in respect of women and also Black Lives Matter. I think I didn't know anything about Black Lives Matter until I heard a judge mention it here in Australia. He awakened me to their prejudice. So I have him to thank because I'm definitely awakening. So I just want to go into that for a moment. I go into stillness if you're wondering why I do this. Yeah, I feel to talk about the issue in Flint, Michigan, that he raised, which was apparently a pipeline which brought water from, I think, one of the big lakes. I think he called Huon Lake. I'm not quite sure exactly the name now, which was good quality water. Apparently, another pipeline was erected and they received very poor quality water through that pipeline. And in the images, they showed it looking very brown. Turns out it had a lot of lead in it. And through the course of the investigation of this poor quality water, it was discovered that the GM factory, General Motors factory, had complained that the water, this poor quality water, was rusting out their componentry for their cars. And because they were a big donor to the governor that was in that state, Snyder they called him, apparently they got the good water. Just that one company got the good water. They piped it there. And the African Americans got the poisoned water, which was high in lead. Apparently, once lead comes into the body, according to the documentary, you can never get rid of it, and that it was making people sick and they died. Some of them died. But again, similar to the situation that happened in New Orleans, with the Hurricane Katrina. Again, this attitude that seems to be within certain sections of that society, and I'm sure it'd be here as well, where they see them as inferior, and it links to economic value. I'm learning about this very much in my own life, given my own homelessness. It's been an enlightening experience for me as I start to understand more clearly how those deemed lower socioeconomic are treated. So if they're dark-skinned, it evokes this idea that they're somehow less. They probably have a different way of speaking, which they do. I have been to the US and I have been to the South. They spoke very differently. There may well be some feelings, attitudes, but you get that in the Caucasian population as well. And inequality brings out that anger in any case because people feel they're being treated like they're not worth anything. And when they're struggling to pay rent and bills and there's no corresponding compassion or response to their suffering, that's where you get this breeding ground of resentment arising. It creates a fertile ground for violence, but I don't believe at all that should be met with repressive approaches. I think it has to be met with understanding and apologies. I mean, this Governor Snyder at one point was booed in one of the public meetings and he said he was apologising, but the people saw it as empty and they were right. It was. And what's been inferred by the film is that it was deliberate poisoning. And if that's the case, which it certainly appears that way because though it was known, Michael Moore talked to a woman who was recording the lead levels of children in respect of the Department of Health there. And she was instructed to change the numbers to safe levels when they were not safe levels. That's why she collected the information and took it to Michael Moore. So what we're dealing with here is not only indifference, but it's criminality. I want to sit with it for a moment because I was really disturbed by that. Yeah, always the words power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely. It's the nature of the system, and certainly in the film people spoke of greed, and that's what I'm investigating myself, is the disease of greed. And I can recall, when I was earning fairly good money at one point. I could have actually made a lot of money if I'd really put my shoulder to the grind, but I wasn't interested in the money, I was interested in the experience. But I can see how it can become addictive, and I can see how people circulate with groups of people who see themselves as successful and powerful. And what I found when I did actually have moments where I've worked with well-to-do, wealthy people was that I found that you can't tell necessarily what the truth is with them. They tend to have a facade. Being seen to be would be the appropriate words. So you're creating a superficial type of image, and people have to fit in with that superficiality in order to belong in that group. So that becomes a them and an us. That's where that all comes from. It's simply based on people's personal experiences. It's the people they rub shoulders with, and then they get influenced by groupthink and the attitudes that arise from normalised discrimination. For me, homelessness has been a very interesting area to look at and to experience predominantly. There have been moments where I've seen incredible kindness in individuals who have felt called on some level to assist me. It's been very interesting. I've been quite fascinated by that. And then on the other hand, there can be indifference to your situation or just a lack of experience. People have no clue what it's like when you have no income and you don't have a home, or you have a very minor income. I mean, my income's survival income, which is fine. I'm at peace with that. I'm a peacemaker, so I can make peace with anything. I'm learning. I accept life as it shows up. I see life as incredibly abundant, in truth, if you're open to really exploring the life in all its forms. I'm not a person who needs a lot of people around me. I don't need to be admired. I don't need to be loved. I have sufficient self-love within me to fulfill my life, really. And I trust life. I don't have faith, I have trust that it's exactly where I need to be. But in this position, I can then examine the society with more clear seeing. The abundance, the material abundance we create around ourselves. The hard work of many people. The various dramas that go on in people's lives, their families. We're definitely all on a journey. And I think going back to Michael Moore's film, because his films are very powerful. He's an incredible journalist. He's a very brave journalist too. I like the way he you have to confront people to a certain extent because they don't wake up. Unfortunately, they're hiding behind their position and often behind security, or they keep themselves well removed from public scrutiny because they don't like the uncomfortable feelings that it probably brings them. But it's very important for people to when I say confront, I just think they have to be faced with consequences of their own actions. Of course, I'm always an advocate for non-violence. You don't need to be violent. But people who aren't aware of the importance of non-violence and perhaps formulate their approach to problem solving through violent means has come from a society that is a culture of violence or a culture of fear. Now, what Michael was also reflecting in the film was clearly the rise of fascism. He was showing images of Nazi Germany. I'm only just going to share with you a little bit of an inspiration, but I'm not going to tell you who it was about. I had that Sieg Heil, Sieg Heil, Sieg Heil come into my mind when I saw a public figure. Now, I've never, ever, ever had that come into my mind before. It was completely unexpected. And it was so surprising that it made me look twice at that person. I went, oh my God, is that person a Nazi? And it literally was. It was. I get a lot of inspiration, so I trust it. I don't care if people don't believe me, but I trust it. And it made me look at fascism. He talked about despotism. That's a more accurate word, the despot. He talked about civics and citizenship at school and how there was a sliding scale from democracy to despotism. He was then obviously doing comparative analysis with Donald Trump in respect of statements that he had made, talking about 16-year terms, 8-year terms, clearly planting seeds, as this woman was reflecting, admiring the Chinese leader who had lifetime tenure. So this is, a dictator, a dictatorial, I want powerful life, admiring Putin. All of this disregarding the very people they say they represent, which clearly they're not. They're keeping up appearances, that's for sure. So I'm going to just go quiet for a moment and have a reflection on despotism and fascism. Oh, immediately the word control comes up. The need for control. Sense of humour comes up too. I see chaos and control, but I often see get smart. It comes up as well. I see the humour, in the chaos and the control. These guys playing out these games, totally removed from the reality on the ground. There's great truth in that. They have no clue the struggle for the single mum or the day-to-day struggle of the couple who are trying to pay bills that keep getting higher and higher, because they're not involved in that. They're living billion-dollar lives, million-dollar lives. I'm talking global elites, who can go anywhere, do anything, and in their world, there is no democracy. Money talks, that's it. So going back to control, it comes from deep insecurity, narcissism, definitely. It was reflected that this was a behavioural characteristic. It's also misogyny in there, of course. So why these things? Alpha males, they're alpha males. They like to dominate. So aggressive is the feeling I'm getting. Aggressive males, very aggressive. I'll stab you in the back. Metaphorically speaking. Okay, there's an emotional disconnect, and I'm looking into his family, his parents, the nature of how powerful families raise their children comes into my mind. Children are taught to be tough, strong is the word, strong man, don't show any weakness. They get very tuned into strategy as young children because they watch their parents manoeuvring politically. So the politics starts early for them. They're part of a club, so there's a sense of belonging to that club, born into the club. This admiration around people who have a lot of money. It is, of course, a myth that there's superiority there. It's simply attaching to material or materialism, and the storyline that we've taught each other in an economy has been to work really hard and, make lots of money and be successful and be admired. That's what they're wanting. It's a little bit like Napoleon. I just saw Napoleon standing there with his hand, very strong figure, no flinching, no weakness in the face of great suffering. They are great leaders. Churchill. It's a very masculine, uncompromising, determined, delusional, in search of greatness. So when he says to make America great, there is a search for greatness occurring because there is an underlying awareness that America is not great. That's why that statement was revived. It also was reported in that documentary that Ronald Reagan said the very same words. So there'd been the 80s. It's also nuclear flash. There was a lot of tension around the nuclear arms race at that time with Reagan. Neoliberalism coming in quite strongly, and and Thatcher in Britain. So this idea of needing to be strong. I do believe that the US economy in the 80s was very indebted. That was when they were recognising the country was weakening economically. So in that right-wing politics, in that conservative politics, they believe in the masculine very strongly. This is why the misogyny is there. They believe in the superiority of the white male. That's why they're typically Caucasian. It's an era of dominance by white men that they're very, very frightened of losing because things are collapsing, and they are. But they've attached their power and their identity to that economic success. And this is why it's very painful to see it diminishing. Now, some may argue that the revitalisation of the high-tech sector is the great panacea. It's not. I was thinking about it today in reality of economics. It's very similar to the financial Wall Street brokers, the gambling, the casino of the market. The market works in terms of, arbitrage comes to mind, the currency shifts, investments, financial investments, superannuation funds that are supposed to be utilising people's savings. It's taken out of people's pays, and that's supposed to give them retirement, income. But what I felt was this is not a real economy. These are not real economies. Typically in economics, the idea of a manufacturing sector. Australia lost its manufacturing sector, and I know the arguments for STEM, science, technology, engineering and maths, have come from this fear of the loss of masculine power. I feel quite certain about that because STEM is typically an area that males thrive. So there's a real fear of losing power is what I'm sensing. The digital economy is the new gold. They're seeing it as replacing currency. Again, I felt it as a stock market. It's a gamble. There's also great questions around the 5G and the health effects of 5G. There certainly are medical reports in the media, alternative media as well, in respect of the impact of shortwave radiation, where there'll be many, many more of these small-scale emitters of radio frequency. Apparently can't pass through buildings, so they are having them more low level. I'm more concerned about the radiation effects of that. And I think there is certainly doctors coming out in the media with great concerns. That needs to be investigated. It needs to be in the public forums to enable the public to make decisions on that rather than experimenting with it and rushing it through. The feeling is make haste slowly would be my advice to those in positions of power, to also look into their own fears. Be mindful of groupthink, of those who reinforce the same thoughts. Be mindful of that. It doesn't mean it's true. Go into your own intuition. Go into a sense of what is in the public interest. If greed becomes the motivation for bringing in this industry, these smart cities, etc., then they won't succeed. And I say that with love and respect to all those who are really involved in this, and I can understand the addiction. It's very exciting. I had a look at some of the cyber stuff and had a look at some of the robotics. I can see why those who innovate in that way found it interesting. But then I thought of the gamers. I feel it's a similar mindset to gamers where they get really excited by the 3D effects and this creating of a world, creating this unlimitedness. I understand where that comes from, but what I would say is it's not grounded. I feel it is not grounded. I feel it as fanciful, particularly in the ecological times we're moving through right now. If it was a smaller industry and these things were being utilised as labour saving to really augment, which is one of the words used, productivity, but in a way that doesn't cause great job loss or casualisation, where it doesn't impact the population in a way that causes great hardship, because for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. You have to understand there are natural laws at play here too. And I know most people don't talk like this in intellectual or political forums because they don't understand the cause of law and effect. The law of cause and effect. I also feel Einstein's words, you cannot change a problem from the same consciousness that created it. Greed has created this economic juggernaut, and we all can be influenced by that when we get caught up in the joy of the money and the power that goes with it. But it is an addiction nonetheless. In order to change the ecological outcomes, I'm a great believer that we can, even though I'm quite sure environmental scientists will say we've actually passed those tipping points. Because I have a lot of amazing things happen in my own life, I actually believe there's great possibilities. I have probably a never-ending well of optimism in truth. So what I'm saying here is, in respect of Einstein, you have to think differently. You have to think anew. Now, people are touting statements of, with the startups and the IT, that we're all thinking differently. You're not. It's still being driven by the same core desire, which is to make a lot of money. This is how economics has always produced great innovation. It's produced great industries. Everything we see in the world has come as a result of a person wanting to make money, wanting to be successful. But with the ecological crisis, those things are no longer in harmony. It was never in harmony in truth, but we had a lag time because the planet had incredible resilience as it was getting depleted and nature being polluted. We weren't good stewards of the planet because we didn't understand how we were intimately connected to those life support systems. So when our attitudes become cut off, they become narcissistic, where it's all about me and I don't care about you, where we become misogynist, where your partners in humanity, the feminine side, is being suppressed or minimised because you're feeling it as a threat in some way. That's your own insecurity asserting itself, unable to face denial within. It's not a conquest or a contest or a competition. It's about learning how to live in harmony as nature intended. I'm sort of going back to Trump right now in my feeling. Totalitarianism is on the table. Democracy, of course, has never really been lived. It's been the belief around democracy that's very powerful. People have believed they're living in a democracy. So there's going to be huge discord when those in Western countries or democratic countries recognise that it's been a lie. I'm just saying it very honestly, because true democracy I have experienced as a market analyst when I interviewed people and had them all giving their views, and I reported on that on the basis of the balance of those views. It was not unlike an election. It was better though, it was more qualitative, so I had a really strong sense. Now, even if I didn't agree with some of those views, I never changed anything. So my reporting was very fair to those voices, as fair as I could be in terms of understanding what they really were saying. I've never been asked myself in my own society what I think in respect of a political question. When I've tried to make contact with political leaders, there's been no response, or a response has been standardised, or it's not quite honest. And what that does is it informs you that there's something else going on here. It doesn't inspire trust. It actually engenders powerlessness, which is, I feel, how people are kept sedated so that they don't speak up. So we are in very, very dynamic times. There have been big protests across the states, particularly with the teachers. I found that really interesting. Michael Moore talked about the teachers wanting better pay because many of them are women, and we all know what the statistic is there with women, 80% of the male wage. Incredible for doing the same job. That's your institutionalised inequality, which some think the idea of equal outcome is undesirable. What might be for you if you're the one who likes the idea of having more, but for those who are getting less for the same task, how would they be feeling? I often have written about Jane Elliott in my blog, Pieces Our True Nature. She was the Texan educator who was quite controversial in creating the Blue-Eyed, Brown-Eyed series, where she divided her class by eye colour. This was based on the Mengele experiments of Nazi Germany. The idea of the Aryan race being supreme. And of course, I've got blue eyes and blonde hair, so I would fit in with that categorisation, although my heart has got every colour in the world in it. I'm not superior to anybody, but I have definitely experienced being treated differently on the basis of how I'm looking. And I knew it was to do with the illusion of white connected with abundance, or respected because there appears through technology to be advances. So Jane Elliott was very interesting in that she divided the class by eye colour. So she would then spend some time saying to the blue-eyed children that they were superior, that you only have to look around the society, see what white people have done, and clearly they're much more clever. Look how they dress, you know. So she would have spent some time making the point that they were far more superior than the brown-eyed children. And she gave privileges to them. She took privileges away from the other group. She gave them all her attention, ignored the other group, so they were excluded. They had to wear collars. So this was kind of emulating your Star of David in actual fact. And in the playground, the children fought as they became divided on the basis of these characteristics of superior and inferior. It can be brought in subtly, or it can be brought in overtly, like in the time of Hitler. She said that when she got them to do tests, the blue-eyed children outperformed the brown-eyed children. And this was all on the basis of what they believed. That's why I've said in one of my previous videos, inequality is a lie. It's a lie that we've believed. I know that not only because of my education, but I know that I've known that since I was a young child. I always knew. I always saw potential in everyone. I guess that's the gift that I've got. So what happened in Jane Elliott's work, she was a primary school teacher, so we're talking grade 3 and grade 4. So these are young children who are going through this experience of discrimination. She then changed it over to the brown-eyed were superior. They were the first peoples, Africa. All the human races sprung from these early, African, races. She talked about the blue eyes as recessive genes, so it was inferior. The brown-eyed were dominant, which is actually true. And then started to go through a process of indoctrinating the brown-eyed children into their superiority, and that the blue-eyed were inferior. And again, giving privileges to the brown-eyed, taking privileges away from the blue-eyed, like their playtime was less. Those children could have, glasses of water or cups of water. So really making them feel included and excluded. And of course, I've done this exercise myself when I was teaching as a World Peace Clown, my Real Hope Peace, Nonviolence, Anti-Bullying program. I divided the children on eye colour, and I had blue-eyed children as clowns. They were superior to the brown-eyed children. We did Chinese whispers is how I did it, and the other children felt jealous because they wanted to play. And then I debriefed them and asked them how they felt. They felt angry, even though they knew it was a game of sorts. They felt angry, the brown-eyed kids, and the blue-eyed kids felt special. And then we talked about the playground, how the children could actually include other children. Maybe they're disabled, maybe some child sitting alone, maybe they have a deformity, maybe they're overweight, maybe they're unattractive, or there's got something about them that the children are rejecting. How do we include them? This is the creation of the understanding, the felt experience of discrimination and the felt experience of inclusion. All of our isms, whether it's narcissism, whether it's sexism, whether it's racism, all these things are emanating from beliefs that are untrue. It's a sign of the great immaturity of our our species, that this is still going on in the year 2019, that we are still being held back by commercial interests. And I know it's commercial interest because when I left university, I had really great capacity, intellectual capacity, and I felt it drop when I even moved into a research company. I felt that intellectual capacity drop because of the commercialisation of work. Whereas I'd been in an intellectual environment where I was constantly thinking and expanding my thought and, challenging. It was very, very interesting. So when greed becomes the purveyor of all that we do, all that we see, all that we think, all that we create, it diminishes humanity in actual fact, because that goal of making more money doesn't necessarily direct resources to the areas that it's most needed. So the inequalities are coming out of really self-interest, which was mentioned in this documentary, and it's true. Selfishness. Greed creates that selfishness because it's all about me. It's not about we. It's not about collaboration and cooperation. It's about winning. The losers can go eat cake. This is a competitive system. The competitive system is actually what's sinking the ship. You can't have all 191 plus nations all competing in the IT area. What you're going to end up with is a lot of distrust being generated from that. And we could see some serious conflicts arising because out of that competition, people will need to win and they will do anything to win. And if there's no regulatory oversight that's not having industry embedded within it, you're not going to have any sort of appropriate standards to ensure that it's a fair game being played here between all these various groups. This is why I said in my other video the importance of governance. Those in government have to be able to weigh competing interests if they're good at what they do, if they're true leaders. And I'm talking real leaders. I'm not talking people pretending to be Napoleon or Winston Churchill who want to force others through projection of power. I don't consider that leadership. I consider that using violence to frighten others, which is the old paradigm. True leaders, really enlightened leaders, are the ones who have the wisdom to balance those competing interests, providing they're coming from a neutral platform. If they've been coming through a revolving door, serving other interests and specifically there to do that, then they will have a bias and that'll become evident in the decisions that they make. And the public will lose. The public interest will lose. I remember hearing on television, they're going, what's the public interest? Actually, it was on radio, 2GB. What's the public interest? This commentator, I'm not sure if I knew who he was, because I don't listen to 2GB. I just happened to be at a place where I turned it on and there it is. And he was, what is the public interest? Well, how do you know what the public interest is? And it was that sort of, narrative. And I was just shaking my head listening to this guy. It's like we're down the pub, having an argument, rather than a sophisticated presenter who is seeking to understand the truth of the matter. I didn't hear that. But he raised the very important question of the public interest. I can tell you what the public interest is. First off, it's I see the scales of justice, impartial. I see blinded to corruption, unable to hear influence from specific quarters, unable to speak words that undermine or divert the course of justice or subvert the course of justice. The public interest is that this social contract between the public and its government is an honest and open contract where there is transparency, not used as a buzzword. It's like what I do in my work, on my blog, on these videos, is I'm transparent. I'm not sitting here with a script trying to convince anybody of anything. I'm simply using my freedom. I don't care whether it's acknowledged by government or not, or whether it's even revoked. My freedom of speech is inalienable. I will always have a freedom of speech. That is my choice. And I will never use that freedom of speech to harm another, but I will definitely raise issues that I think are in the public interest. So that is another pillar of the public interest. So justice, freedom of speech, freedom of association, very much it aligns with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. These are the freedoms. The government is collecting taxation, and through its constitutional duty is to provide services to the public on the basis of collecting that money and to represent their interests. So government that is unbiased is in the public interest. Government that is not corrupt is in the public interest. Decision-making that balances competing interests, predominantly coming from an origin of duty of care and the public interest, is what serves the voice of the people. Understanding the needs and the concerns of the public and what is for their highest good is in the public interest. So, for example, if an economic system is empowering the few over the many, that is not in the public interest. If an economy is driven by greed and that creates technologies that pollute the environment, that extract too many resources from the planetary systems, that sullies potable water, that removes topsoil through technologies that are completely removed from the natural rhythm of nature, if that is occurring, that's not in the public interest. If those representatives are selected by others and their election is a foregone conclusion, that is not in the public interest, because elections must be free and fair. If there are agendas at play that do not represent what the people want, then that is not in the public interest. So why is the public interest important? I'm sure that many people will be, not many, but let's just say that small percentage that is ruling the world, let's say, they might be saying, well, why is the public interest important? We don't care. We're the ones who are creating the industries. We're the ones making all the money. This is the world we've created. We're the leaders. They just need to do as we want. It's not about their interests, it's about our interests. If our interests are not fulfilled, then we can't do what we're doing. Is that true? What if there was a way to bring those interests together? I do know that way. There would have to be a shift in consciousness within that ruling class, where suddenly, and this may happen to some of them, and it will happen to some of them, where suddenly they will realise that they haven't been true to themselves, that their life was a lie, that they've taken way too much, that they're not happy. That then brings upon that person a very deep desire to self-reflect on one's life. I recommend things like writing diaries, asking yourself questions like, is it true, what I've believed, always believed? Do I really feel my life has been of benefit to others? And another way of seeing it too is, imagine you're on your deathbed. That's a really good one. How do I want to be remembered? Do I want to be remembered as a tyrant? Do I want to feel that I was a loving parent? Do I want to feel that I did all the things in my life that I felt moved to do? Am I happy with who I am at this point? Can I relinquish life and move into another expression? Because it's usually when people are faced with their own death, in actual fact, and this is even in war zones. This could be in car accidents. Suddenly a person's been faced with their death and their whole life changes. Or they've had a near death. The work I did, as I've mentioned in other videos, is I did interview people who died and come back. And they completely saw the world differently. They realised their purpose was to love one another. That's a very powerful realisation at the point of you could have died. They often have their life flash before their eyes. They see things. Some of them, or if not all of them, go out of their body, and they could be in an operating room above the table looking down on the body of themselves. I've heard people say to me that they either felt detached when they looked down. It didn't seem like their body at all. Others recognised themselves. Predominantly the theme is they don't want to go back. And I know there's people living today who don't want to be here. They definitely want to move on because they're not happy with the way the world is. But in those moments when you really are confronted or out of your body and you're seeing things in a different light, literally, something fundamental changes. Now, I know people said that they've been told to go back. Well, who told them to go back? Good question. Others didn't want to. I talked to a guy, that's right, I remember at a library. He was someone I befriended for a while, and he told me he suddenly died. He was next to his wife, and he said he literally went out through the corner of the room, and he said that he was told, this is your time, and he said, I can't go because my children. He was really concerned about his kids. Now, he was told, if you go back, it won't be easy. And he made the decision to come back. Now, those that I interviewed said that they didn't want to come back. They felt a freedom in that space. But for one reason or another, they made a decision to come back. I know one guy, he'd had a head-on car accident and he'd actually exploded 3/4 of his brain. And in that near-death experience where he was above the car and he saw an ambulance come, he was told he had to go back, and he didn't want to because he knew it would be very painful. So he went back into his body. He was in a coma for 3 months, and when he awoke, he said that he thought he was talking normally, but in actual fact it was gobbledygook, blah, 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 blah. But he thought in his mind he was hearing himself talk normally. He had 3/4 of his brain exploded on impact. So this guy, where he ended up recovering to, was he was able to speak. I couldn't even tell that he'd had an accident when I met him. But he was able to see spiritual people around us. It was pretty haunting for me at the time because we were sitting at a table and he was describing people around us. You have to be pretty open-minded when you're talking to someone like that. And he said he had telepathic abilities that he didn't have prior to the accident. He had an affinity with animals, he said. And, he was able to go out of his body. So when you look at life from that perspective, and then we cast it back over Trump and we cast it over the decline in democracy, the rise of nepotism, despotism, fascism, we can see that humanity is operating out of an unconsciousness, and very much a self-interested space of total control in order to try and control what's natural. It's a game that hasn't worked in history, and as Gandhi said very clearly, that empires rise and fall. They always fall. And I think, harking back to what's been said here, the times we're moving in right now are collapsing a paradigm, and there is a desperate grab for that wealth. And I know that the high-tech stuff is all about that. It's a desperate grab for this wealth to keep it going, to keep the status, to keep that sense of power happening. But I'm here to say to you that the real power was never in the money, nor the digital currency, nor the autonomous vehicles, nor the cameras and lights, nor the surveillance, nor the NBN. The power was never there. And it's interesting, word power, because this was all about keeping that power flowing because of the great wealth and interests that have been established via coal burning and electricity generation. And it's no coincidence that this is all happening in this way, where this grid is being constructed. But the real world is that the ecological system cannot sustain humanity because it is out of balance. Those scales are very much weighted towards a small group on the planet because of the power we give when there's money involved. We give our power away. Or when we feel great fear, we give it away thinking someone knows better when they don't. No matter how confident they look, they do not have the power over nature. Nature is the final arbiter here and always has been. So the ecological system is collapsing. The lack of affiliation with the species on the planet, the objectivization of that species, which is a form of narcissism, even towards the wildlife. It's detached. It sees objects. It sees commodities. It doesn't see living, breathing beings that coexist with humanity. That requires a higher consciousness to be able to see the blueprint of the natural world that we did not create. This incredible genetic blueprint, which is brilliant in actual fact. Now, I always laugh when I go into, some of these like JB Hi-Fi type stores, when you see the big pictures of nature. And I think, go out in it. Go and travel. Stop living vicariously through technology. Go and live it. You see all these great adventures, these movies, they're all movies. It's not your life. Get out and live your life. The near-death stuff teaches you that you are here to have an experience in your life. You're not meant to be just sitting on screens, although if that's the life you choose, go ahead. There's a universal freedom in that. You're free to choose. So the oceans fished out by what they say 2050, fished out because massive drift nets. This was the greed that created, 100-kilometre drift nets. That's greed. Let's get as much fish as we can without any thought of balance. Is this going to deplete other stocks? What about other fishes that live off those fish? What of the plankton? What of the electromagnetic radiation? What of the endless, infinite growth modelling that we hang our hats on to say this is success? This has grown by 2%, by 10%. It's still extracting resources. It's not working within a system that's finite. It's not reallocating resources in accordance with demand and supply, which creates a balance, which is what economics was originally designed to do. It was seeking to create that balance through the pricing quantity mechanism. So basically, people are getting what they need. But if those needs are being distorted by marketing, well, then you're going to be extracting far, far more. And typically what people do is they discard things. How many things have you accumulated in your house? Have a look. How much do you use? Hardly anything. That's waste. We talk recycling. Well, it doesn't get recycled, does it? Look at nature. You throw a banana peel on soil and it breaks down. That's recycling. We don't have the sensitivity to feel the nature, feel ourselves as nature, because we've created thought forms that have served models that are not in balance with the natural world order, which is a system that's incredibly versatile. It's not self-reliant, it's interdependent. So even words like self-reliant are a misnomer if you're taking into account our activity in relationship to nature. The sun is not hot. That's what I found out. Isn't that amazing? The sun is actually cold. If you go into space, it's not hot. You're not going to melt. You'll freeze. It's what creates the heating on the planet. Well, atmosphere comes to mind. How does the atmosphere heat the planet? Well, CO2 emissions obviously are creating a thicker layer, which is trapping heat. And we have not moved away from, these CO2 emissions. So our true nature is balance. That's what I want to leave you with. And equality is actually balance. When we balance with one another, we realize there's no superior, there's no inferior. We are all one. And when we start to love one another, we naturally share. That is the rebalancing point that we need to reach. I send great love to you and peace, and I send love to Donald Trump. May he find his humility and equality with all of life. He has possibilities if he chooses to take them. I send love to the corporates, and I hope that they're able to find their way back to democracy. We'll certainly be here to assist you. Take care. Bye.